The millionaire sat in his luxury car outside a small cafe, staring at the simple sign above the door, wondering why he had stopped there in the first place when he had his own chef waiting at home, yet something about the little place drew him in, perhaps because it looked so ordinary, so far from the glittering world he usually lived in, and maybe he was tired of everything that screamed wealth and power, tired of rooms filled with polished glass and empty conversations, tired of smiles that were only for his money, and as he stepped inside, the warm smell of freshly baked bread mixed with coffee wrapped around him like a blanket he had not felt in years, the kind of comfort he never found in his grand mansion, and though no one inside seemed to notice him at first, it felt almost refreshing, as if for a moment he was invisible in the best way, not a man with millions, but just another stranger passing through, and he sat down at a corner table, quietly watching people chat and laugh, their lives simple but filled with a joy he secretly envied, until suddenly his eyes caught a young girl who sat alone near the window, scribbling something into a small notebook, her face calm yet curious as if she was writing down the world she saw, and when her eyes met his, instead of the quick glance of recognition he was used to, she stared with an unusual boldness, the kind that made him feel as though she could see not the suit, not the watch, not the car keys on the table, but something else entirely: his sadness, the loneliness he tried so hard to hide, and before he could look away, she stood up and walked over with the simple confidence of someone who had nothing to lose, and she stopped at his table, tilted her head slightly, and said words he never expected to hear, "I can fix your broken heart," and for a moment, he froze, caught between shock and disbelief, unsure whether to laugh or be offended, for no one had ever dared speak to him like that, let alone a girl so young and unassuming, and he tried to respond with a smile, tried to cover his discomfort with the charm he used in boardrooms, but inside, her words cut deeper than he cared to admit, because how could she know, how could a stranger, much less a child, sense the ache he carried, the ache that no amount of money had healed, and though he managed to dismiss her with a polite thank you, her eyes held steady, filled with a quiet certainty that unsettled him, and as she returned to her seat, he found himself unable to focus on anything else, replaying her words in his mind, wondering why they felt less like an innocent remark and more like a truth spoken aloud, and though he told himself to forget it, to finish his coffee and leave, he sat there longer than planned, his thoughts heavier than the cup in his hand, and for the first time in years, he felt something stir inside him: not anger, not bitterness, but curiosity, a pull toward the mystery of how someone so small, so ordinary, could see straight into the emptiness he had tried to bury beneath riches, and as he finally left the cafe, her voice lingered like an echo, a whisper that followed him into the silence of his car, and no matter how much he tried to dismiss it, he knew deep down that something had just begun, something he could not name yet, but something that refused to let go. The millionaire could not stop thinking about the strange encounter at the cafe, the words of the young girl echoing in his mind as if they were stitched into the silence of his life, "I can fix your broken heart," and though he had laughed it off at first, her steady eyes refused to leave his memory, haunting him in the quiet moments when he was alone in his mansion filled with furniture that gleamed but never felt alive, and in the mornings when he sat at a long dining table with food no one shared, and though he tried to drown her words in meetings and business calls, they returned again and again like an unfinished melody, and so, a week later, almost against his own will, he found himself back at the same cafe, hoping to see her, though he told himself it was only curiosity, nothing more, and as luck would have it, she was there again, sitting near the same window, her notebook open as if she were waiting for someone or perhaps simply writing for herself, and when she noticed him, her face lit with a small smile, not the kind of smile he was used to, the practiced ones that people gave him for his wealth, but one that carried warmth, simple and unpolished, and before he knew it, she walked over again and sat across from him without asking, as if she belonged there, and though he wanted to question her boldness, he found himself strangely comforted by it, and she began speaking softly, not about money, not about his business, but about little things, like how she noticed he always sat with his shoulders heavy as if carrying a weight, or how his eyes looked tired though his clothes were perfect, and slowly she began doing small things that unsettled him yet soothed him, like sliding half of her muffin across the table and telling him he should taste something sweet because sometimes life felt better that way, or making him walk with her outside after coffee to notice how the trees bent in the wind yet still stood strong, and though he wanted to dismiss it as childish, he found himself listening, actually listening, and realizing no one in years had spoken to him about life in such a raw, simple way, free of expectation, and over the next few days, he returned again and again, drawn to her unexplainable presence, and each time she found little ways to heal something inside him. Once she left a folded paper on his table with a list of reasons why people were worth more than their mistakes. Another time she made him give a coin to a homeless man outside and told him to look into the man's eyes instead of walking away, and another day she simply told him to breathe deeply and notice the world around him instead of drowning in numbers and screens, and though these seemed like small acts, he felt them working inside him in ways he could not ignore, for each gesture chipped away at the wall he had built around his heart. Each word reminded him that he was still human and not just a machine built to earn, and with every meeting, he grew less like the untouchable millionaire and more like a man learning to live again, yet at the same time, he felt a growing fear because he could not understand why this young girl cared, why she had chosen him, and whether he dared let himself believe that broken hearts could truly be mended, and though part of him still resisted, another part, the part that longed for connection, began to hope, and it was this hope that kept bringing him back, searching for the next small act, waiting for the next moment when he might feel alive again. The days turned into weeks, and what had once been a life of endless silence and carefully built walls around his heart slowly began to change, for the millionaire who once sat at his grand table alone now found himself sitting across from the young girl in that little cafe, waiting for her words, her laughter, her strange but healing ways of looking at the world, and though he told himself he was only curious, deep inside he knew he was slowly letting her into places he had shut for years. Places filled with grief, disappointment, and betrayal that had made him believe no one could be trusted, no one could be close, and no one could love without a reason, and yet here she was, breaking down his walls not with force but with kindness so soft it felt like a quiet storm, and one afternoon, as they walked down a crowded street, she pointed to a group of children chasing a paper kite, their laughter spilling into the air like music, and she asked him when was the last time he had laughed that way, not a polite laugh, not a business smile, but real laughter that came from the soul, and he stopped walking, realizing he could not remember, and the weight of that truth almost crushed him, but instead of mocking him or leaving him in silence, she touched his arm gently and told him it was never too late, that the heart always remembers how to be free if only given a chance, and those words struck him deeper than he expected, for no one had spoken to him with such belief, and slowly he began to notice changes in himself, like how he no longer ignored the doorman who greeted him but actually asked about his day, or how he paused to listen to music playing on the street instead of rushing past, or how he allowed himself to smile without wondering what people thought, and the girl saw this change too, encouraging him with every small step, yet behind her gentle encouragement was also a test, for she asked him questions that peeled away at his guarded heart, like why he feared being alone, why he locked himself away in business towers instead of living among people, and though answering was hard, he found himself speaking truths he had never told anyone, not even those who once called themselves his closest friends, and with every confession, another brick from his wall seemed to fall, leaving him both lighter and more vulnerable. But the strange part was that vulnerability no longer scared him as much, for she made him see it as strength instead of weakness. And one evening, as they sat by the river, watching the golden glow of the sunset spread across the water, he finally admitted aloud something he had buried for years, that he was not afraid of losing money or power, but he was terrified of losing people, because everyone he had trusted before had left or betrayed him. And as the words left his mouth, his chest tightened as though he had unlocked a door he had sworn never to open. But she listened silently, her eyes holding a depth far beyond her years, and instead of pity, she gave him something different: acceptance. And in that acceptance he felt the walls around him crumble further, for he realized this girl was not here for his wealth, not here for his influence, but simply for him, a broken man learning to stand again. And for the first time, he began to wonder if perhaps she had come into his life for a reason greater than chance, perhaps as the very answer to a question he had never dared to ask. And though the thought scared him, it also filled him with a hope he had not felt in years, a hope that maybe, just maybe, his heart could still be healed. And with each passing moment, the walls that once shielded him from pain now fell one after another, leaving him exposed but also free, standing on the edge of something he did not yet fully understand but deeply wanted to believe in. The millionaire had always measured richness by the numbers in his bank accounts, the size of his mansions, the speed of his cars, and the weight of the gold watches on his wrist. But as the days with the young girl stretched into months, he began to see a new kind of richness that could not be counted or locked away, for he started noticing things he had once overlooked: the laughter of children playing in the park, the smell of fresh bread from a small bakery, the warmth of sunlight touching his skin, and even the peace in hearing his own heartbeat in the quiet of the night. And with each moment he realized these treasures could never be bought, no matter how much money he owned. And one day she asked him to leave behind his limousine and walk through the busy streets with her, and at first he felt uncomfortable as strangers brushed past, some recognizing him, some ignoring him, but soon he saw the beauty in blending with the crowd, in being part of life rather than watching from behind glass windows. And she led him to a small family-owned restaurant tucked away in an alley, where the chairs were old and the plates mismatched, but the food was warm, the people were kind, and the laughter at the tables was richer than the silence of his golden dining hall. And for the first time in years, he tasted not only food but joy, the kind that comes when people eat together not because of status but because of love. And as he watched her greet strangers with ease, speaking with them as though they were lifelong friends, he realized richness was not about what he possessed but about the connections he had been too afraid to make. And that night, as he returned to his empty mansion, the silence felt heavier than before, not because he was lonely, but because he finally understood that the emptiness was of his own making, built by years of chasing wealth instead of warmth. And the next day, he surprised her by asking if she would help him share his riches in a different way, not through business deals or luxury gifts, but through acts of kindness that could not be repaid. And she agreed with a smile, knowing this was the moment his transformation had truly begun. And together they started small, visiting a children's home where he quietly donated books and toys but also sat down on the floor to play with the kids, something he had not done since his own childhood. And as their laughter filled the room, he felt a joy far greater than signing $1 million contract. And later they went to a shelter where he not only offered money but served food with his own hands, meeting the eyes of people who thanked him not for his wealth but for his time. And every step made him feel lighter, as though the weight of his past pride was slowly lifting. And though at times he faltered, Feeling awkward in places far from his polished world, her presence reminded him that true value was not found in perfection but in presence, and little by little, he stopped seeing himself as a man trapped by sorrow and began to see himself as someone capable of giving hope, and in this new way of living, he discovered a richness deeper than any he had known, a richness built on laughter, on kindness, on the simple gift of being there for others, and yet even as he embraced this new life, there lingered a quiet suspense in his heart. A question he dared not speak but could not ignore: was this girl simply teaching him to heal, or was she the very reason his heart had been broken in the first place, so it could be rebuilt stronger, fuller, and ready to love again? The day came when the millionaire finally realized that the journey he had taken with the young girl was not just about healing his broken heart but also about keeping a promise, for long ago when they first met, she had looked into his tired eyes and said with a quiet confidence, "I can fix your broken heart," and though at that time he had thought her words were only the hopeful dreams of someone too young to understand the weight of sorrow, now he stood at the edge of a new life, knowing she had already done what she had promised, though not in the way he had expected, because she had not tried to erase his pain with empty comfort or distract him with false joy, but instead she had walked with him through the shadows of his grief, showing him that healing came not from forgetting the past but from learning to live with it, to accept it, and to find meaning beyond it. And on this final day of their journey, she invited him to a quiet hill overlooking the city where the lights sparkled like stars fallen to earth, and as the evening breeze brushed against their faces, she reminded him of the first time they met, of how broken he looked, and how little hope he carried, and he could not help but laugh softly at the memory, because now he felt lighter, freer, more alive than he ever thought possible, and in that moment he turned to her and asked why she had chosen him, a man who had everything money could buy but nothing that truly mattered, and her answer was simple yet powerful, for she said she had once been broken too, unseen and unheard, until someone showed her that even the smallest kindness could restore hope, and she had promised herself that one day she would do the same for another soul, and when she saw him, she knew it was her chance to fulfill that vow, and hearing this, he felt his chest tighten, not from sorrow but from a new kind of gratitude that reached deeper than words, and then she told him that the promise was not just to fix his heart, but to help him discover how to use that healed heart to change the lives of others, for true healing is not complete until it spreads beyond one person, and he understood, nodding silently as the truth sank in, and over the weeks that followed he continued what they had begun together, opening his home not as a mansion of wealth but as a place of refuge for children with no family, for women and men who needed shelter, for dreamers who needed support, and with every new face he welcomed, he felt his heart growing stronger, not because it had forgotten its pain but because it had been rebuilt into something greater, and one evening, as he watched the laughter of children echo in the halls that once stood empty, he realized the promise had come full circle, and when he looked at the girl who had walked with him through it all, he whispered, "You did it, you fixed my broken heart," but she only smiled gently and replied, "No, you fixed it yourself, I only reminded you how," and in that silence, filled with understanding, he felt a peace that no fortune could ever buy, and though the world still saw him as a millionaire, he now knew his true riches were not in numbers or possessions but in the lives he touched, and that night, standing by the window as the city lights glimmered below, he finally let go of the last shadow of loneliness, because her promise had been fulfilled, and his heart was no longer broken, it was whole, alive, and ready to keep shining for others, just as she had shined for him.